As the host of Neutralize, the Mama Trauma podcast, I am delighted to be able to bring you this podcast. My name is Wendy Lopez, and I would like to introduce myself to you. I specialize in helping people overcome their emotional blocks through different techniques, through emotional empowerment coaching and compassionate healing light facilitation. As a mom who has experienced narcissistic trauma, I help moms eradicate self-doubt in order to regain self-confidence to elevate their status both at home and at work. In our podcast, we discuss people's struggles, triumphs, and failures. We dive deeper into self-love, self-compassion, self-acceptance, and mindful, holistic tips. In every episode, I hope that you can take a golden nugget of advice and apply it to the journey of motherhood in order to raise your level of awareness. Welcome to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast, where you find healing and creative mental thought advice from experts on past pain, narcissistic experiences, and trauma. Today, I have a special guest. Her name is Stephanie Lanier. Stephanie's story is one of love, rebellion, determination, and faith. Once upon a time, she dreamed of a holistic lifestyle where work and learning with her children and being immersed in nature all flowed together throughout her days. Now she's living that life and strategically helping other moms, entrepreneurs do the same through her company, NEO Strategic. But not too long ago, she was living a very different lifestyle, feeling stuck in a job, location, and marriage that no longer felt aligned, striving to achieve the unrealistic goal of being the best at every aspect of her life, which left her exhausted, in a constant hurry and juggling so many things that something had to break. Little did she know that what her life would break would be her finger. And that was a catalyst that gave her time to sit down and reevaluate everything in her life. So we're going to get to the story of finger. But we talked about before jumping on the podcast about I wrote it down here, not recognizing being emotionally abused.
Yeah.
So I would love to start there. Like, what was that for you realizing? I think you told me you just realized it 3 years ago.
Yeah, sure thing. Wendy, thank you for having me on the podcast, first and foremost. And yeah, so when I was a young child, there was a family member that I spent a lot of time with because there was a mutual interest, a hobby interest there. And part of me, looking back, knows that I was always had the spirit of independence, even as a child. And I felt more grown up when I was with her. What I did not realize until, like you said, 3 years ago, when I was going through some deep EMDR therapy after my divorce, was that feeling of being grown up was because she was treating me as if I were a grown adult and I was only a child. And part of the treating me as a grown adult was introducing topics that only adults should be talking about. And there were also aspects of grooming that were part of the conversations and interactions with her friends that I was around. And yeah, it was in EMDR therapy that my therapist said, you do realize you were sexually abused as a child. And that's a very strong term
Right.
that I didn't, and I still, if I'm being very transparent and honest, I still don't fully resonate with using that term because in my mind, sexual abuse meant physical, like actually physically.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And however, didn't plan to go here, but however, recently there have been memories that have surfaced, like recently, as in the last 6 months,
Okay.
of not being touched in no touch zones, but being touched by adults that never should have been touching me, rubbing my legs or getting too close and just too touchy feely with a child.
Mm.
Yeah. So that, and like I said, I grew up not knowing that that was
So
part of it.
I just realized, so not even knowing emotionally, but you weren't knowing also on a physical level, right? Because it's almost like a border, not crossing a threshold from an actual sexual abuse that people know of, but staying in the board, like the pre-border. So there's no getting in trouble or someone being told on that something happened. So that's kind of very sneaky manipulation.
Yes. And that is a very good word for interactions with this particular adult as a child. And she would talk to me about very explicit sexual encounters she had. And I was told from the age of 10 all the way through my teenage years that unless you were sexually active with a man, you weren't worth anything to him. He didn't like you. So I even went into my first relationship with these thoughts of like,
right.
On one hand, my parents are saints. They're very supportive, very wonderful individuals. They did not know that a lot of this was going on. I also think there were a little bit of blinders there for familial reasons. But they didn't know this was going on. And within their care, it was a completely opposite statement. It was abstinence till marriage. It was save yourself, for your husband and all that. So I had two very differing beliefs being fed into my young mind. And the relative would tell me, don't tell your mom and dad this. You can't say anything about this to your parents or they'll never let you hang out with me again. And that person I saw as my ticket to freedom, and she knew that. I just gave part of that away, but anyways, she knew that, and she used it.
Right. So it sounds like she knew, like you said, there was a curiosity part within you, and she would exploit that.
Very much so.
And this is what us women in general, you just happen to have that experience with a family member that's a female, but normally what you experience is what women experience with men.
Yes.
And it comes in very disguised. And that's where we don't know, like we talked about, we don't know what we don't know because we haven't been, like a podcast like this, haven't been made aware of how these things can come through and create trauma, right? Yes. So leading into when we talked about, then you landed with a relationship that mirrored basically everything that you went through with this female family member, but now it was your husband.
It was my husband. It was the first man that I was ever with, and intimately, and I was very much pressured from the very beginning of the relationship, that similar thing, like, well, if we're not going to be intimate, then you're not worth anything to me. And I bought into it, and I was scared that nobody else was going to like me, because that was another thing that the family member had told me often when I was a child, was that I was homely pretty, but I would never be somebody that people would actually, turn their heads towards. Like I wasn't that pretty. And so I heard that message quite often. And by the time I was dating age,
wow,
I believed it. And, thought, well, this is my one chance. That's kind of the mentality I had.
wow. Right. So it's like, get what you can grab right now, especially with them telling you, wow, I've never heard such a thing. So, and it's so interesting, right? Like the way you grew up, the way I grew up, the way the world, everyone in the world grows up, they're told so many different things about themselves that each and every one of us have believed it.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we create situations from the toxic things that people have instilled in us since children.
Yeah.
Since we were so young, right? And in your case too, yours was a female, so we're more trusting with the female. And I know I had that experience like with my sisters. I was very trusting with my sisters. They were just what I considered bullies. They were my sisters, right?
Yes.
In your case, this was a family member who happens to be a female, but pushing the boundary from a healthy family relationship to kind of incest.
Yeah, it's close.
Pushing that border.
I wouldn't say incest because it was other people she was pushing me towards.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't necessarily herself, but she was pushing you towards other people. Okay.
Yes, which is why I said grooming earlier, where it
was
like,
okay, gotcha. You're right.
At the age of 12, being told it was okay for guys to touch my legs and that was normal, and you wanted that. That's healthy attention, or that's, I don't know that she used the word healthy, but yeah. So there was that, and then there was also a whole lot of just mind control type games where making me feel bad when I wanted to go hang out with my friends instead of spend time with her. And it was actually about the time I turned 17 that I started to recognize that, and I rebelled against it and completely pulled away.
Oh,
and another thing I had been told by this particular family member was that I was going to end up a pregnant teenager just like she had, and not be able to go to my parents because of it. And I was told this from a young age, just multiple times, over and over and over again. Oh, yeah, you're going to end up pregnant at, in your teens, just like I was, and I'm going to be the only person you can come to. And I, no shame to anybody else, but abortion is something I am very against. And I actually considered abortion when I did turn up pregnant at 19, simply as a rebellion method, because I did not want her to find out. I chose to keep the baby, which actually ended up being stillborn.
Oh, interesting.
But I chose to keep the baby, but it gave me the courage to actually approach my parents, which is something I never would have done if it hadn't been for that rebellion against, her telling me all the time that she was going to be the one I went back to.
Wow. That's incredible. So the mind manipulation was to the extreme with this family person.
Yes.
And what would you say was with the relationship with this person? What opened up your eyes to really go the other way now?
Like I said, when I was 17, and I had started, I played all the sports. I also, my senior year in high school, I was so ahead on classes that I was given the opportunity to attend 2 college courses in conjunction with my high school courses, but I had to do that in the evenings. And every year at Christmas, her partner would take me shopping with him for her. And I, because of my classes, had completely forgot. Like I have a full class load as a senior in high school. I'm going to 2 college classes in addition to my regular senior high school classes. I'm also playing sports and I was working. And it slipped my mind that we were supposed to go Christmas shopping for her. And there was I was made to feel like I was the most selfish person ever. And at that age, 17 was a very rebellious year for me. I pretty much quit doing anything everybody expected me to do. And that was one of them. I was like, well, you don't like that? Fine. We're breaking up. I'm done.
Oh, right.
And I did that in multiple areas of my life that year. And that was one of them.
Wow. And so when you went on and you married, you had the same experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how long was that marriage that you realized that you were going through the same thing that you originally went through when you were a child?
I actually did not, for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
I started noticing that I was not myself when I found a group of colleagues that I identified with, but they would talk about their home life and it was very much a contrast to mine.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, oh, so that's normal? Like you tell him that you need him to help you with stuff and he actually does it? Like that's a thing, which my father had been very helpful in our home, but my parents had very, very clear roles in how they managed the housework and they divvied things up. And so I guess it didn't even occur to me, or it did. And I just kind of repressed that over the years, that my ex-husband didn't help with anything as far as the kids. His job paid about half of what mine paid. He complained about it all the time. Was constantly depressed. He never wanted to go do anything together. He didn't want to go out with my friends. He didn't want to go places other than going out to eat at one particular restaurant, just us by ourselves. That was the extent of our social life as a couple.
Wow. And how long were you guys married?
We were married for 17 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what was the turning point there for you? What made you to release yourself from that? Did something happen?
There were a couple. About 2 years into our marriage, I wanted to get a divorce. And I did not confess that to anybody other than 2 really close girlfriends at the time. But we had all grown up in a Christian community, very conservative Christian environment. And I had been told my entire life that divorce wasn't a word unless adultery was present. Like it's not even it's not even up for consideration unless there's abuse or adultery. And by abuse, I thought it meant physical abuse.
Right.
And there weren't either of those things present. And so I talked myself into staying and I just tried harder. And that became my standard method that just became how I operated, was like, okay, this isn't working, so I must need to do something better. And so I just tried harder, tried all the things, keep the house clean, be more adventurous, in the bedroom, take everything
Trying
on
to fill
that
all those holes, right? All those gaps.
yeah,
I've been there
yeah,
before. Yeah, I know what
yep,
that's like. Yep.
exactly. And so that went on, and we ended up having two more children. And when the third one came, I had two under two, and then I had a 9-year-old. And the two under two I was home with all day at the time, and had zero help at all. Zero help at night, zero help when he came home, was still expected to have dinner on the table, was still expected to do all the grocery shopping, all the things. And that just really wore me down to the point that my deepest desire was to stay home with my children. But I started looking for a job, A, because we needed the income, and B, because I needed a break. I felt like a job was going to be a break. That was the point I got to. And that led to the job, where I had the colleagues who became very close friends and showed me what healthy marital relationships looked like, that were very much in contrast to my own.
Wow.
And then I started adopting some of their methods. Like, one of my girlfriends said, why do you feel like you have to make a home cooked meal every day? Like, girl, you work full time, you have 3 kids, pay attention to your kids. Like, just throw something, eat eggs every night. Like, who cares? And so I started doing some of that, and that did not create a very healthy, I got pushback from my ex-husband on that big time. But at that point, I was like, I don't care. My kids are my focus right now. And so I just really started focusing on them, and I quit focusing on the marriage as much. And my ex spiraled downward. And it was in his spiral downward that I was trying to figure out, like, okay, what are we going to do? I either have to get a divorce, or we have to fix this together somehow. And I convinced him to sell everything and buy an RV and take off on this gap year adventure travel journey, hoping, because he would always say that he wanted to move somewhere else. Like, that was what was making him so depressed. He wanted to own land, and he wanted to buy land sight unseen. So our compromise was, no, we're going to go on this travel adventure, find the land, and then settle. And he was on board with it. But in all honesty, he was a friendly travel companion about one day of the week. And so the rest of the time, he was very much just dark, deep in himself, angry, and just depressed, like lack of motivation. There were also some questionable things with my older daughter, things that I had seen, things that I had overheard. Like, he was being inappropriate at times, and I had talked to him about it. And long story short, COVID happened, and the whole storm that COVID created brought to surface some of the ways that he had been inappropriate that I was not familiar with. And so he was pretty quickly escorted out of our lives.
Oh, wow.
So it was nothing that I did to change that necessarily.
So wild, right? So here you were trying to be the best possible wife, filling every gap, doing everything possible to keep a family, and it didn't even turn out to be anything of what was happening, but there was something darker that was actually occurring. Wow. Oh my goodness.
And if I look back, there's signs. There was darkness, that there were things he would have on TV when my younger daughters were around that I was not okay with. And there were a lot of signs that I just chose to ignore in the name of trying to keep the family together and trying to, we'll just get through this. And I'll admit there's also a part of me. I'm a very logical thinker. I'm a strategizer. And I would sit down and think through, like, okay, if I do leave him, then what? Like, then he gets my children without me being present for how often during the year. And so is me getting a divorce selfish? Is that still going to be protecting them? And that was a big part of my decision to stay and just try harder, was because I was scared of my kids ever being alone with him.
Right. That is a thing. Yes, because in the court system, you have to have proof of that something is happening. And if you don't have it, well, he's, the partner is going to get whatever time allotted that he's going to get. And they do have those days, nights by themselves. That's been something that I've thought about before. Exactly. Yeah. Wow. That is, oh, wow. That's heavy duty. But you know what? I'm so glad things turned out the way that they did. Honestly, that could have been the best thing for you and your children.
It really was. And I don't like to make light of it, because my oldest bore the brunt of what happened, I feel like. But in light of that, it was the best possible way any of this could have happened all around. Just we were greeted with a community of support. We just happened to be in a location whenever I found out that we were with people who cared about my girls and I already, and immediately stepped in and took us away and kept us safe and cared for during the COVID lockdown, because that happened it was literally the week of the COVID lockdown when everything was brought to light. And it was like this big spotlight was put on all the things that had been really dark and really wrong for a long time, not only in my marriage, but in my own personal life and just mindset and thought patterns. And a lot of it had to do with, I truly believe, we had just gone on this journey. And so we were exposed to different places, different ideas, different people. And I was also in the online community. I was trying, at the time, I wanted to become a coach. And yet part of me knew that I wasn't ready to coach others. I needed coaching myself. And I knew I needed a deeper, I knew I needed healing, not even a deeper layer, because at this point I had not really done a whole lot of healing. And we were in this place that we were exposed to people who that was their normal life. Their normal life was, talking to a therapist and having a coach to support them through their next phase of their journey. And different ways of viewing things, and very whole and loving ways of approaching life and viewing life.
So what would you say to someone that's listening if they're going through something like this? How would you suggest, because like what we talked about, I'm going to go back from the beginning, where you didn't know you were being emotionally abused. You didn't know that marriage that you were in wasn't normal. Now that you know what you know, what would you tell someone now? What do they need to look for? What is it that would have helped you to kind of, because you had the blessing of seeing the colleagues, but what if someone doesn't have that?
Yeah.
What's your suggestion?
So first off, I would say it really comes back to knowing yourself which is hard if you grow up with other people telling you who you are or who you aren't. And that was a lot of my issue that I realize now. But one way to get reacquainted with yourself, and this is actually after I broke my finger, these were my two immediate, like, I've got to change something in my life. What do I do? I started meditating every morning or praying, whatever at the time it was prayer. It was sitting in silence is really what it was. I had heard as a child in church, that you need to listen for God's voice. But then the topic of prayer was always introduced as people speaking to God and really begging him for things. Right. And it occurred to me that I needed to actually sit and listen for God. And I wouldn't be able to hear him if I was praying, giving my petitions. So I had made it a commitment after breaking my finger that every morning I was going to get up 15 minutes early and spend 10 minutes upstairs, like 5 minutes to get upstairs, and then 10 minutes in this one little spot that I had of just being really quiet. And at the time, I would repeat a Bible verse whenever my mind started to wander, because when you start doing this, your brain is, not used to being still. Your mind's not used to being quiet. So all the thoughts that you are trying to not think come rushing in.
Right.
And so it helps to just have a phrase that you repeat over and over and over again. And then I had a gratitude practice where I had read a book about like giving, I think it's called 1,000 Gifts. It's by Anne Boskamp. And she talks about trying to record everything you're grateful for to get yourself out of the place of trauma and overwhelm without the help of therapy. Like if you don't have the resources for that, that's one way to help yourself. And it was when you start focusing on the things you are grateful for, the things that are in contrast to that, which are, the husband who doesn't appreciate you, or the little things that seem out of place and prick your conscience, you start noticing those, I think, even more. So yeah, I know that's tricky. I think about this a lot. And it's part of the reason why I don't go public with my story as often as I would like to, because I'm still working through that. I recognize that
I commend you for that. Yeah, that's so good.
That's so good. I have a very unique, other side. I know a lot of people still have to deal with their toxic exes and share the parenting roles with,
you don't have to deal with that.
Yeah. And so part of me is almost scared to share that, because I could definitely see myself, if it was me on the flip side, being like, yeah, well, you don't know what I have to still deal with, but to answer your question, if somebody is in a relationship, just try to remember who you are. Who were you as a little kid? Like when you were outside having fun and just, in that place of joy, and then start trying to notice what aspects of your adult life take you away from that feeling versus bring you closer to that feeling.
And I have to add, right, doing something like that is actually in the scope of whatever you're going through, moms, like it seems like it won't do anything, but it has some major power behind it. And consistency is key to do these tips that are offered in this podcast. And if we were to apply them, you will get some type of answer, because that's really what we're looking for, right? We're stuck. And in your case, it was very beautiful. It landed with you. This might land with somebody, but it landed with you about this being in stillness versus being in the position of petitioning and asking, and you're doing the talking versus being still, where you can position yourself to get the answer. And I love, like what you said, you used a Bible verse to distract your mind from going elsewhere, right? Yes. And then I love what you said about the gratitude, recording what your gratitude is focused on, right? Because everything is focus. So if we
Yes.
shift the focus to the gratitude, then you can expand in receiving also answers.
Yeah. And I will tell
Right.
you that gratitude practice started out like at first it was like, I don't even know where to start. Like, yeah, I'm grateful for my kids,
Right.
but the book helped. She actually gives you some tips, and it expanded to a place of, okay, I have to wash the dishes. Nobody else is helping wash the dishes. Like one more thing that my spouse doesn't help with. But then I'd get to the dishes, and while I'm washing them, I'm thinking, okay, thank you that I have running water. Thank you that I'm doing
Mm.
this in a warm house instead of, having to drag all my dishes down to the creek and
Mm.
wash them in the freezing cold water, and thank you. Just you start thinking, and I really had to start thinking in like the terms of, would this have mattered 80 years ago? And will it matter 80 years from now? And that's kind of another tool I used a lot to manage my emotions, to manage my tasks that seemed overwhelming at the time. Um, and that helped a lot.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. Also, another tip to think about it to manage your emotions. What did you say? Would it, if it would matter 80 years ago or 80 years forward?
If I both, so it depends. Like if it's something that I'm starting to feel ungrateful for, like having to do the dishes. If
Okay.
this was 80 years ago, like in, well, I want to say 1920, but that's not
Yeah.
true. It's 1940 now. Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
Um, like, in the 1940s, would a housewife, what would she say to me if I was grumbling about this task I'm doing versus in 80 years, is it going to matter? Like if I'm starting to get upset over my kids not picking up their toys when I tell them to, am I going to care about that 80 years from now? No, I'm not. Am I going to care if I'm damaging these little souls that have been entrusted to me because I'm yelling at them over something as trivial as picking up their toys? That kind of became, that's a way that I regulated myself, because the underlying rage and resentment built up to a point that I did have times where not just times, I went through a phase of, I call it mom rage,
Mhm.
where
I've heard that.
I
Yeah.
was just lashing out. I would lash out at my kids and I could feel it. It was almost like something that would take over my body. I almost like, once it started, it was really hard to stop it. And
Wow,
so,
really?
yeah, if
Oh,
I could feel it getting started, then
okay.
hey, is this going to matter 80 years from now? Like what part of this is important? That would be a way that I could reel it back in. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, um,
Wow. Thank goodness you had that.
yeah, I didn't have it soon enough, unfortunately. I feel like
So, how long would you say, because I've heard of the term mom rage, how long would you say you dealt with that by yourself?
I dealt with that. It was pretty much, it was probably it was 4.5 years when I went back to work with two kids under the age of two, to a full-time job and a
I
spouse who was
developed.
not helping and
Oh,
demanding, and still expected, the home cooked meal when I came home from working every day and the other things after everybody was put to bed. And yeah, it was, it was just this exhaustion and lack of self-regulation. And this is something that came out in the EMDR therapy that I went through and ultimately led back to, no, this is not where that started, because anger is really ultimately something we do to ourselves, right? Like when we give up our power to others, that is when anger starts being developed within us. And through the therapy, I learned that I had been doing that most of my life, like giving up my power to other people around me. And so it was just built and built and built. And I recently told somebody, there's moms listening to this, so you probably are familiar with the Disney movie Moana, but I thought it was such a beautiful representation of what happens like when we as moms forget our heart and our core. At the very end of Moana, you know, the whole time they're searching for the heart of Tafiti, and they're supposed to take it back to, you know, return the heart to the island. And they're met with this volcano monster person that is, I think, called Shaka, or has a different name, but actually ends up being the goddess who has lost her heart. And so she's this raging volcanic monster. And when her heart is returned to her, she lays down into the shape of an island, and like all these lush, beautiful flowers bloom. And the first time I saw that, I burst into tears.
Right, because that so resonated with how your internal feelings were as a mother.
Yeah.
You were so disconnected from your own heart.
Mm-hmm. And I see a lot of other moms who go through it and are just so ashamed to admit it. And so it's something we don't talk about, because who wants to talk about being the mean mom to their kids, you know, being the raging monster.
Who wants to like mess up, right?
Yeah, like that's not something we typically bring into our mommy circles. But if you listen closely, you can hear it, and it's disguised as other things, you know, the mommy wine culture. Like, I just need a glass to get through the day of being with my kids. Like it's a chore. Yeah. And when we're really tapped into our heart and our heart space, it's not a chore. It's the blessing of our lives, you know?
Right.
And it's not just us. Society also perpetuates that story for us because it wants us to be workers, adding to, you know, an extra person to add to the taxes, and it feeds into the whole thing.
Right. And this is why I have the podcast, which is Neutralize the Trauma. So as we neutralize the trauma, we can be better mothers, right? Yes. But we become better to ourselves. It just transcends to our children.
That's right. And that's what's so important.
Foster a healthy environment. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So how can our audience find you online? How can they know about you?
Yeah. So this is pretty exciting because another friend of mine who is a single mom and I have just decided to start a podcast of our own where we have conversations like this, but also more focused on like being single moms who are entrepreneurs and how that is it's a whole other set of, you know, things to think about. Because in a lot of the online entrepreneurial spaces, neither one of us felt like we were really represented. Neither one of us subscribed to the boss babe culture. You know, it's very masculine energy. Like we still want to be soft mamas and have this belief that that's the way the world is shifting. And grateful for it and grateful for the work you're doing because of it. But yeah, my brand is Neo Strategic. Neo stands for New Eyes Open. And it was a term that came to me long before this actual process started. I used to teach world cultures, and every time I would talk about a different culture, the idea of like, oh, I see the world with new eyes now. My new eyes have been open to somebody else's perspective on how they look at the world or what their life experience is like. And I used to talk about that with my students. But the more I grow and learn, and I went from being somebody that kind of scoffed at therapists and psychiatrists to somebody who has gone through more healing and therapy and stuff over the last 3 years than I ever imagined. And yeah, it's opened my eyes to another way of seeing things. So Neo Strategic, I'm on Instagram Neostrategic.org is my website. I'm pivoting right now into more. I did help businesses with their operations, and I am taking that skill set and bringing it to moms, especially single moms, and helping them design a holistic life business strategy so that it all flows together instead of it happened to be this segmented thing where, work is one part of my life and motherhood is another part of my life and me being me is a different part of my life. That's not how we're meant to live life. It's meant to be, we are one person, all parts of us blend together to create the world that we want to create. And so, yeah,
that's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Well, keep going. So grateful to have, women like us. Like you said, you didn't subscribe to the boss babe culture. I didn't either. Even, being that working mom, hustling, I didn't subscribe to the hustle culture either.
The hustle,
I really believe, we're here to earn our reward and compensation through our gifts and talents. And that is harnessing the softer side of who we are, right?
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because my journey and healing with my clients has been harnessing their softer side so they can get out in the world to date and not date with that masculine energy. Yeah, that's what I help women
huge.
with. It's huge, right? Yeah. So I didn't realize until you just said that right now, how about working, but with the softness. And I didn't know I'm doing that with helping single moms date again, but with their soft, intuitive, feminine self. So instead of that masculine, because then you're going to mirror that masculine energy, and that we've been there. That's not going to work.
It's not what we need. So, no. Yeah. And it's all getting back to your heart and giving to yourself first before you're ready to give any of yourself to other people, right? Like that's whether it be your kids or a potential partner. Yeah.
Right. Well, like I said before hopping on and hitting record, I would love to have you back. There is another couple stories that you do have that resonate with the podcast. And I'm all about bringing forth any golden nugget that moms can take and, have a better day tomorrow, implement something today and have a better night with your kids. Right. So it's all about progress, growth, transformation, transmuting all this trauma so we can find the beauty in the trauma and lead life through that versus in the suffering.
I love that. I'm here for all of that. And
all right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for listening. And we'll have all our Stephanie's links and how you can get in touch with her. And if you resonate with her, definitely subscribe to work with her as well. And thank you for gracing us with your wisdom, your presence, and your experience. I really do appreciate that. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much for having me, Wendy, and for providing the space. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to Neutralize the Mama Trauma podcast. If you haven't already, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any new episodes. It would also mean the world to me if you're able to take a moment and rate and review my podcast on how it was helpful to you. Also, please connect with me on my social media platforms. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you in the next episode.